crafter, welcome to my channel Craft is Autonomous. Today and for the rest of the Fridays in the month of October, I am going to be doing Crochet Fridays that focus on teaching different combinations of Tunisian stitches to create different Tunisian textures and patterns. So today I'm going to be bringing you a stitch that I have not really decided on a name for this, because the thing with Tunisian crochet is there's really only about 3, maybe 4 basic stitches, and everything else that you do is just some kind of variant on those stitches. And besides for those few basic stitches, the names are really not standardized. So what one person might call, say, reverse Tunisian Simple Stitch, another person might call a twisted Tunisian Simple Stitch. So I'm not going to confuse you all with these words and different names because I've seen them used lots of different ways, but I'm going to be bringing a pattern that incorporates the Tunisian Knit Stitch and a variation of the Tunisian Simple Stitch. If you watch this video and you recognize this pattern and go, hey, that's actually the whatever pattern, please leave a comment down below so I can update my title for this video and let y'all know what this pattern is actually called. Like I said, I couldn't really find an official name for it, and I don't really have a name for it either, so we're just gonna jump into learning this fun texture. Today I'm going to be using some Red Heart yarn. I will link this down below. I don't know off the top of my head what color this is. And the Red Heart packaging recommends using a size I 5.5mm hook size. So with Tunisian crochet, because it tends to curl, it's a good idea to go up a hook size or 2. I will probably go up to a size K 6.5mm hook. I'm going to be using one of my Denise interchangeable crochet hooks. I really love this kit, and I also have the mini pack so that way I can make double-ended hooks for working in the round. I'm not sponsored by Denise, but I do have an Amazon affiliate link that I will put in the description down below for this big kit. I personally have been really happy with this product. And I'm not going to bother extending this hook since I'm just going to do a narrow little section, but obviously if you're making something wider, you'll want to extend your hook. So we're going to start by creating our foundation row. So we're going to be starting by making a chain. So I'm starting with a slip knot, and I'm going to make a chain. I've got some other videos on that I can link to if you don't know how to create a slip knot. And I'm just going to pick up 11 stitches. You can do an odd number of stitches or an even number of stitches. It does not matter for this pattern. So I worked 11 chains, and now we're going to work in the back loops of the chain, that little back nub there. I like to pick up from there, and we're not going to pick up from the first one. We'll go to the second one, insert our hook, and pick up a loop. Next one, insert our hook, and pick up a loop. Insert our hook, pick up a loop, and do this all the way down. So now I've got 11 loops on my hook, and I'm going to work the standard return pass where we first of all yarn over and pull through 1 loop. And then for the rest of the way back, we're going to yarn over, pull through 2 loops, yarn over, pull through 2 loops, and repeat this until we have just 1 loop left on our hook. Alright, so that's essentially our foundation row. Now that we've got that worked, it's time to learn how to do this stitch. There's going to be 2 rows to this pattern, and it's essentially a repeating stitch, and we're just going to swap which order we go on each row. So for my first row, I'm going to start in my first stitch. I'm going to do a knit stitch. So a knit stitch is where we go between the 2 posts of our stitch and go out all the way to the back, yarn over, and pull a loop up through to the front. If you're not familiar with the knit stitch, I will link a video showing that in more depth. And then in our next stitch, we're going to work a variation of the Tunisian Simple Stitch. I looked and looked and looked, and I could not find the name for this. I am absolutely positive this has a name, but I couldn't find some kind of standard name for it. So I'm just calling this the back post Tunisian Simple Stitch, where instead of working in the front post of the stitch, we're going to work in the back post. And we're going to work in the back post from the front. So here's the front one we normally would work in, but instead I'm going to go behind this back post. So right through there and catch that. So I've inserted through there, and then yarn over and pull up a loop to complete that stitch. And we're going to alternate that the whole way across. So we just did the back post Tunisian Simple Stitch. So next stitch we're going to do a knit stitch. Just the standard Tunisian knit stitch, pull up a loop, and then we're going to work that back post Tunisian Simple Stitch where I catch underneath the back bar, that back post of my stitch, and just catch it up and bring up a loop, then a knit stitch, work a Tunisian Simple Stitch in the back loop, and keep repeating this all the way to the end of our row, just alternating back and forth between the 2 stitches. Once we've worked the forward pass of our first row, we're going to work a standard return pass where we yarn over and pull through 1, and then yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2, and so on and so forth until we have just 1 loop left on our hook. Now for row 2, we're going to do something very similar to what we did, but since in the first row we started with a knit stitch and then alternated between the simple stitch variant and the knit stitch, this time we're going to start with the simple stitch variant and then go knit stitch, simple stitch, knit stitch, simple stitch. Just keep bouncing back and forth between those the rest of the way down. So our first stitch is going to be that back post simple stitch, so we're going to find our stitch and come underneath that back post from right to left, and we're keeping our hook to the front. Yarn over and pull up a loop. Next stitch we're going to do a knit stitch, so go between the 2 posts, out through the back, yarn over and pull up a loop. Then to our Tunisian Simple Stitch variant, pull up a loop, knit stitch, and work this all the way to the end of our row. And then for our return pass, work a standard return pass where you yarn over and pull through 1 loop, and then the rest of the way back yarn over and pull through 2 loops. And that is the entirety of the stitch pattern. The way it works is on our first row we start with a knit stitch, and then we alternate between the knit stitch and what I'm calling the back post Tunisian Simple Stitch. Then the next row we start with a simple stitch and alternate between that simple stitch variation and the knit stitch. Then the following row we repeat what we did with the first row, where we're going to start with a knit stitch and then alternate between the knit stitch and the Tunisian Simple Stitch variant. So that's pretty much all there is to this stitch. Before I wrap up this video, I'm going to show you 2 things. The first thing I'm going to show you is a tip that'll make working this a little easier, because you may start working on this and forget, oh no, did I start the last row with the knit stitch, or did I start it with the back post Tunisian Simple Stitch? So I'm going to show you what each of those look like. So if we look at our first stitch of the previous row, that's this guy right here. And then we go down a row and look at the stitch beneath it. See how that stitch has that kind of V look? That's the knit stitch. So that means this stitch here was worked as a knit stitch into the previous row, meaning when we pulled up this loop, we inserted down in here. That tells us that this row started with a knit stitch. So now this row that we're working next is going to start with the back post Tunisian Simple Stitch. Let me show you what it looks like if the stitch below was the back stitch Tunisian Simple. So now this row, this is the row I just worked. If we look at the first stitch of the previous row, so that's this guy right here, if we're looking right there at that stitch. When we look at the stitch in the row below it, see how it looks like it's kind of pulled off to the left? We've got this post here, and it's kind of pulled to the left-hand side, and there's not another side to the V. That means that when we worked this stitch, we worked it as a back post Tunisian Simple Stitch working under this, because I've got hooked here with the yellow is the back post of that stitch, and then right there with the tip of the hook is pointing, that was the front post, that left vertical bar of that stitch. So this shows us that for a previous row, the first stitch was worked as a back post Tunisian Simple Stitch, which means when we start this next row, we're going to start with a Tunisian knit stitch. And then to finish the row, just keep alternating between the knit stitch and the back post Tunisian Simple Stitch, and just work it as long and as big as you need to for your project. So the second thing I want to show you is just working this stitch with smaller yarn and a bigger hook. And I've got these hooks run through the bottom because, yes, like with all Tunisian projects, this stitch wants to curl. I personally find that whenever I use a Tunisian knit stitch in particular, I get pretty bad curl. But to minimize the curl, you can go up a hook size, which is what I did with this yarn right here. I honestly have no idea what type of yarn this is. This is left over from one of my sister's projects, so it might be baby yarn, it might be random yarn from a yard sale, I don't really know. But it's a very fine, lightweight yarn, probably about a weight 3. And I worked it up with a really big hook size. So this is an M hook, a size 9mm. And working with a bigger hook makes it look a little more lacy and kind of lattice-like. So that's a really pretty look. If you just increase your hook size, you see a little less definition perhaps, but more of a lacy look. Whereas with the smaller hook size, you see more definition, but it's not so lacy and it's a more dense fabric. But there you have it. Now you have learned a new Tunisian stitch pattern. I hope you guys enjoyed this. Again, this is the first of, well, we have 5 Fridays this month, so the first of 5 Crochet Fridays that are going to be focused on Tunisian crochet textures and patterns. So make sure you come back next Friday. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and comment down below if you're trying this. Let me know how you're going to use this stitch and what project you're going to use this pattern for. But I will see you in my next video, and until then, happy crafting!